Thank you, my viewers and learners. I take this opportunity to welcome you to my lesson today, where I'm going to discuss with you the thematic concerns or themes in the novel Fathers of Nations. Before we start our discussion, please take a minute, subscribe to this channel, like, comment, and also share. So let's look at these thematic concerns, and we are going to start with the themes, the definition of these themes. We talk of themes, then these are just issues that are consistent in a creative work, and they are subcategories or subtopics of the topic matter or the main idea in the art, in the work of art. So these themes, we find that they are categorized into two. We have major themes and we also have minor themes. Major themes cut across the text, and they are the main ideas the writer intends to pass to the readers. While minor themes also, we can say, they are the ideas which are still very important in the text, and they are not spread all over the text, but we find them at some points. Now, I want to give a list of the themes that we are having in the novel Fathers of Nations before we start looking at them one by one. So these themes are as follows. We have theme of poor leadership, we have poverty, we have corruption, theme of betrayal, plight of women in the society, neocolonialism or imperialism. We have theme of disillusionment or despair, theme of tribalism, or we call it nepotism. We have theme of suffering, oppression, or death. Then the last theme is theme of change or transition. So these are some of the themes that I want us to look at with their illustrations, how they are used and how they are explained in the novel Fathers of Nations. Now, viewers, let's start with the first theme, and that is poor leadership. The first theme is poor leadership. Poor leadership is the failure of leaders to govern effectively, often resulting in political instability, economic decline, and sometimes suffering for the citizens. That shows, or that is what we call poor leadership. What or which are the illustrations that we can have from the text? Let us see the illustrations as they are explained in the novel Fathers of Nations. So these are some of the illustrations of poor leadership from the novel Fathers of Nations. One, we have the ineffective Banjul Summit. Africans head of state meet in Banjul, but instead of discussing solutions to the continent's problems, these leaders engage in petty issues, providing their lack or vision. Second illustration for poor leadership, President Bangora's contradictions. Bangora first refuses to consider the reform document, that is the Path Alpha and Path Omega. Yet, he is later appointed as the leader of the committee which is meant to review them. This shows the inconsistency and hypocrisy among the leaders. The third illustration of poor leadership, we have the mistreatment of intellectuals like Dr. Afolabi. So despite his knowledge and experience, because Dr. Afolabi is a learned character in the novel, Dr. Afolabi's reform ideas are ignored, demonstrating that African leaders do not value intellectual input. We expect to see Dr. Afolabi's advice and idea being, included in the process of decision making and governing the country, but his good idea is ignored. We have Comrade Melusi's marginalization. Even though he fought for Zimbabwe's independence, his government dismisses him based on tribal politics, revealing leadership that is more focused on personal interest than in national unity. And that brings us to, that also speaks some discrimination, political discrimination, resulting to poor leadership. We can now come to the fifth illustration of poor leadership, and that is where we see the leader's disconnection from reality. While ordinary citizens suffer from poverty and poor infrastructure, leaders live in luxury and remain indifferent to the struggles of their people. Those are some of the illustrations for poor leadership in the novel Fathers of Nations. Let's come to the second theme, and that is theme of poverty. Poverty is another theme that is explored and illustrated in the novel Fathers of Nations. Poverty in the novel represents the widespread economic struggles faced by the majority of Africans due to corruption, mismanagement, and neocolonial influence. And it highlights the gap between the wealthy ruling class and the suffering citizens. Now, what are some of the illustrations of poverty in the novel? Let's look at these illustrations. The first illustration is Dr. Kimani's financial struggle. Despite being highly educated and once earning well, Professor Kimani's income has significantly dropped due to the economic mismanagement, reflecting how even intellectuals suffers from poverty. We expect Professor Kimani to have some good salaries and some good money, but his salary scale keeps dropping, showing poverty. Unemployment, the unemployment of university graduates in Gambia, as the second illustration. Look at Fiona Mackenzie's driver. Despite having a university degree, is jobless and is forced to rely on driving tourists, showing the high unemployment rates in Africa. The third illustration, the high cost of living in Zimbabwe, where we have Comrade Melusi, who notes that eating in a hotel is a luxury only to foreigners, because only the foreigners can afford it. This illustrates the dire economic conditions in Africa. Third illustration for poverty, we have the Structural Adjustment Programs, SAPs, in Zimbabwe. So we see the economic policies imposed by the international community worsen poverty instead of elevating it. This proves that poor leadership leads to economic decline. Viewers and learners, the fifth illustration of poverty in this novel poor infrastructure leading to suffering. Professor Kimani's wife dies in a car accident which is caused by bad roads, highlighting how poverty affects basic services like transport, showing how much starvations the citizens in African countries are going through. Let's look at the third theme, which is corruption. We talk of corruption in Fathers of Nation. It is portrayed as a widespread disease which affects African governance. And it includes bribery. We have election rigging, embezzlement, and manipulation of policies for personal gain. That is what we call corruption. Corruption has been illustrated in various ways, and this is as follows. The first instance of corruption, as illustrated, we have the bribery at Act number 22. Bribery at Act number 22. We have Fiona Mackenzie's driver is stopped at a police checkpoint and is forced to pay a bribe, illustrating how corruption affects everyday life. The second illustration of illustration of corruption, we have election rigging in Zimbabwe. We have Comrade Melusi and other candidates collectively receives only 1% of the vote, while the president gets 99%. This shows that elections are manipulated to keep corrupt leaders in power. Learners, the third illustration of corruption, we have the secret deal between Dr. Afolabi and Nick Sentinel. Afolabi manages to put Path Alpha on the summit agenda through a trick which is suggested by Nick Sentinel, implying that political processes are often corrupt and manipulated by the wealthy political individuals. The fourth illustration of corruption, we have Minister T. Zinto's self-serving interest. Minister T. Zinto's self-serving interest. So instead of focusing on national development, the minister is more interested in securing foreign loans, and these foreign loans are for benefit gain, demonstrating the greed of African politicians. The fifth illustration of corruption, we have the control of wealth by criminal networks. The control of wealth by criminal networks. Wars and organized crime control political and economic opportunities, proving that corruption extends beyond government officials to power networks of influences. So we talk of the control of wealth by criminal networks. Then we see that wars and organized crimes, they control political and economic opportunities, proving that corruption extends beyond government officials to power networks of influence. Learners and viewers, the fourth theme in the novel we have betrayal. And betrayal is the act of breaking trust, whether political, personal, or ideological. And in Fathers of Nations, betrayal is seen in governance, personal relationships, and broken promises. What are some of the illustrations that we have for this theme, betrayal? Comrade Melusi's betrayal by his own government. Comrade Melusi's betrayal by his own government. Despite fighting for Zimbabwe's independence, Melusi is sidelined due to tribal politics. The very government he helped establish turns against him. Another illustration, we have Dr. Afolabi's betrayal by his wife. His wife leaves him for another man, symbolizing personal betrayal and loss of personal stability in a corrupt system. The next illustration of betrayal, we have Pastor Chiamaka's arrest. The government arrests him despite his peaceful sermons advocating for better governance. His betrayal is by the state, which oppresses free speech. Very interesting. Let's see the fourth illustration of betrayal. So we have the leaders' betrayal of their citizens. At the Banjul Summit, we have African leaders waste time in fruitless debates instead of addressing real problems, betraying their people's trust. Then we also can talk about the African Union's failure to bring change. The African Union failure to bring change. So we have the AU is supposed to unite and uplift Africa, but it is portrayed as ineffective, betraying the hope of an independent, prosperous Africa. We all believe that AU is supposed to uplift and to unite, but we see AU, African Union, being ineffective and not able to effectively manage the African countries. Let's come to the fifth theme, plight of women in society. Women in the novel are marginalized and are respected and suffer from oppression in a patriarchal society. We have some illustrations as follows. One, absence of women in leadership. The title Fathers of Nations itself excludes women, reflecting their lack of representation in politics. Two, Pastor Chiamaka's wife struggles. When Chiamaka is imprisoned, his wife is left to take care of the family alone, showing the burdens women bear. Third, Fiona Mackenzie's experience at Arc number 22. She stopped at a checkpoint where her driver is harassed for a bribe, reflecting how women, even foreigners, witness systematic corruption. Fourth, limited female influence in decision making. Women in the novel are rarely seen participating in major decision making, reflecting gender inequality. And fifth, we have the general economic struggles of women. Women in African societies are often left to manage homes in harsh economic conditions, with little support from the government policies. Let's look at the sixth theme in the novel, Fathers of Nations. Neocolonialism or imperialism. So, neocolonialism refers to the continued control of Africa by foreign nations either through economic or political means. We have a number of illustrations. The first illustration, we have structural adjustment programs, the SAPs, in Zimbabwe. So Western financial institutions impose SAPs, worsening the economic situation instead of improving it. The second illustration for neocolonialism, we have Third Longway's influence in Africa. So as an American agent, Longway manipulates African leaders to push the Path Alpha agenda. This shows the external interference. The third illustration from neocolonialism, we have foreign control over African resources. So many African countries remain economically dependent on their former colonial rulers for trade and for aid, financial support, showing neocolonialism and imperialism in African countries. We have Western nations conditional aid as the fourth illustration. So African nations are often forced to adopt policies that benefit donor countries rather than their own people. So most of the policies that African countries adopt, we find that they favor and they give a lot of growth and development, not to our own countries, but to the donor countries. The fifth illustration, the role of international financial institutions. So institutions like IMF and World Bank dictates policies to African governments, limiting their sovereignty, showing neocolonialism or imperialism. The seventh theme in the novel Fathers of Nations, we have disillusionment or despair. We have disillusionment or despair. Disillusionment occurs when people lose hope in leadership, in governance, or reform due to repeated failures and betrayals. Let's look at the illustrations for disillusionment. One, we have Professor Kimani's frustrations. Professor Kimani's frustrations. Despite his academic achievements, he realizes that intellectuals have no real power to influence change. Second illustration, the public's apathy toward elections. Citizens no longer believe elections can bring change, as they are often rigged. Every election we have rigging, and poor leaders or very poor and ineffective leaders set themselves to power. The second illustration, we can talk of the failure of Banjul Summit as the third illustration. Failure of the Banjul Summit. So the summit meant to discuss African progress, achieves nothing, deepening people's frustration with the leadership. And the third illustration for the same, we have Dr. Afolabi's rejection by his colleagues. So despite his efforts to bring reforms, his ideas are ignored, making him feel powerless. My learners and viewers, the fifth illustration, we have the economic struggles of ordinary people. So many Africans, for example, Fiona Mackenzie's driver, are highly educated yet unemployed, leading to widespread despair. Let's look at the eighth theme in the novel, Fathers of Nations. So, what about the eighth theme? That is tribalism, nepotism. Tribalism or nepotism. Tribalism is favoring one's ethnic group, while nepotism is favoring relatives or friends for jobs and resources instead of using merit. These are the illustrations for the same. The first illustration for tribalism, we have Comrade Melusi's dismissal. He is fired simply because he is Ndebele, showing how tribalism affects governance. The second illustration, we have an equal distribution of resources. And for this, we see the government projects favor certain ethnic groups, while others remain underdeveloped. And the third illustration, we can say, appointment of leaders based on ethnicity. So many political leaders appoint officials from their tribes instead of the most qualified candidates, showing tribalism. And the fourth illustration, we can say, elections rigged along tribal lines. In Zimbabwean elections, we see a lot of manipulations of election results to favor certain tribes in power. And the last illustration, we can see the civil unrest due to tribalism. Civil unrest due to tribalism. So we see tribal favoritism creates division among citizens, preventing national unity and causing a lot of disagreement and disunity among the African citizens. Theme number 9, we have suffering, oppression, and death. So the novel also highlights the suffering and oppression faced by ordinary citizens under corrupt and dictatorial regimes. The following are the illustrations for suffering, oppression, and death. 1. Pastor Chiamaika's imprisonment. Pastor Chiamaika's imprisonment. So he is jailed for speaking against government injustices, showing oppression. Second, we have economic hardships in Zimbabwe. The economy is in ruins, making it difficult for people to afford the basic needs. Third illustration, we can have political violence against opponents. Those who oppose the government are often jailed or even exiled. And the fourth, we can talk of police brutality at Act number 22. Citizens are constantly harassed by corrupt police officers demanding for bribes. The fifth illustration, the poor state of infrastructure. The poor state of infrastructure. So we have the neglected roads and healthcare systems leading to death as seen in Kimani's experience. Now, let's look at the last theme, and that is change or transition. Change or transition. Change and transition refers to effort to reform governance and society, though often met by resistance. Illustrations for change, we have Dr. Afolabi's push for Path Alpha. He fights to introduce reforms at the summit, showing the desire for change. The second illustration, viewers, we have the summit's debate on Path Alpha. So it represents an attempt to shift African governance model. Third illustration, the rise of intellectuals like Kimani. So educated individuals push for reforms despite government oppositions. And the fourth illustration, we have Comrade Melusi's hope for change. Despite the betrayal, Comrade Melusi still believes in the possibility of a better Zimbabwe. And the fifth illustration, we have the growing discontent among citizens. Public dissatisfaction is increasing day by day, signaling a push for change. Learners and viewers, those are the themes in the novel Fathers of Nations. I hope you have enjoyed the lesson and you have also learned, understood, and have the notes with you. So I want to thank you once again for subscribing and putting your like and comment, and even for sharing. And even if you have not done that, learners and viewers, please subscribe, like, and share. Thank you, and thank you so much.